Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. There are still nearly 2 months until the new administration takes over, and already global markets and international leaders and the Americans who are paying attention are bracing themselves for a set of economic policies from the incoming Trump administration that could be brutally costly, both to the American people and the global economy. And what makes this all so weird is that, well, they're basically exactly what Trump said he was going to do. Now, there were huge parts of the Trump agenda the former president and his campaign tried to distance themselves from. If you think of Project 2025, which Trump said he'd never heard of, had nothing to do with, and now he's hiring the mastermind behind it to run the powerful Office of Management and Budget. Trump played coy about plenty of stuff like that in the campaign, right? But he was clear and consistent about the central ideas for the economy. Mass deportations would extract a brutal human and economic cost. Using tariffs to inaugurate the kind of trade war we haven't seen in probably a century. And then a sort of late addition in the last few months of the campaign, deputizing the world's richest man to look for trillions of dollars to unilaterally cut out of the U.S. budget, all of which would be colossally destructive and unprecedented. And again, they did not hide the ball on this stuff. They were very upfront about all that. Even as virtually every reputable economist in America, including 23 Nobel laureates, blasted that economic plan as a disastrous recipe for higher prices, slower economic growth, even a recession or worse. And now, again, we're in the situation where bankers and analysts, CEOs, everyday Americans are kind of watching and just sort of hoping that the Trump White House will not do exactly what they said they would do. And oddly enough, there's a pretty concrete example of this exact same thing happening recently in a peer country. It happened in the United Kingdom back in 2022. You may have forgotten this, but that summer, Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced his resignation. After Brexit and COVID and then a whole host of scandals, his government had failed to stop inflation, the cost of living crisis in that country, something that happened to all sorts of countries in the developed world and wreaked political havoc. And he was succeeded by a fellow conservative named Liz Truss, the woman you see there, who promised this new economic agenda that was dubbed Trussonomics. And she was explicit, right? Her plan to restore Britain to greatness was massive cuts to taxes on corporations, bankers' bonuses, and wealthy incomes. And the idea was that those wealthy job creators would fuel economic growth. And in the meantime, to make up for the monumental amount of lost revenue from the tax cuts, the Tory government would just borrow heavily to cover its expenses. Now, critics called her plan casino economics and Robin Hood in reverse. They said it would be a windfall for the rich. It would deepen income inequality, all while, crucially, weakening the British pound and short-circuiting interest rates. But right-wing politicians love the plan, including the former deputy director of Trump's National Economic Council.
The new British Prime Minister Liz Truss has laid out a terrific supply-side economic growth plan, which looks a lot like the basic thrust of Kevin McCarthy's Commitment to America plan. The sooner her plan is implemented, the faster Britain will climb out of the doldrums. And just as Liz Truss is overturning Boris Johnson, the GOP seeks to overturn Joe Biden.
Right, so that's the idea. The economy is moribund, it's in the doldrums. You need this sort of shock therapy from a right-wing policy apparatus to shock the country back into prosperity. And to their credit, in England, they really did it. As soon as Truss moved into 10 Downing Street that September, she put her budget plan into effect. And within weeks, the results were clear.
Prime Minister, it sounds like you're saying crisis, what crisis?
I'm not saying that at all. I think we're in a very serious situation.
Liz Truss was speaking for the first time since the mini-budget last week, which led to a collapse in the value of the pound, higher interest rates and extreme volatility on the financial markets.
This is something that you see in developing countries going through difficulties. You normally do not see this in a G7 economy.
And yet, Liz Truss pulled it off, right? She sank the British economy overnight, just as critics said she would. The British pound plummeted to new lows against the dollar. Bank and mortgage interest rates spiked, precisely as predicted. There were huge protests. Market went crazy. Efforts by Truss's top financial minister to calm the markets didn't inspire much confidence.
But I can be frank. I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it. I get it. We are listening and have listened. And now I want to focus on delivering the major parts of our growth package.
So this conservative economic program proved to be so unpopular so fast that the government plummeted in popularity overnight. And as Truss and her ministers kept doing what they said they were going to do, they were transparent about it. A British tabloid started live streaming a head of lettuce, asking viewers which would last longer, the salad vegetable or the prime ministership of Liz Truss. And 44 days after Liz Truss took office, the lettuce won.
We set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party.
It took only a month and a half for Truss to do exactly what she planned to do with the British budget. It sank the British economy. It made her the shortest-serving prime minister in history, congratulations, with the lowest approval rating ever. In fact, her conservative successor, Rishi Sunak, basically walked away entirely from Trussonomics. But that was not enough, because this year, he and his party still suffered a historic loss of power in parliamentary elections because Tory politics had become absolutely radioactive. OK, so that's what happened in the UK. And I'll just say up front, there's lots of differences between their parliamentary system and our different branches of government, the checks and balances and the veto points and the presidential system. But we're here in the U.S., right, awaiting the inauguration of Donald Trump, who was elected by voters basically begging for relief from high prices, who openly plans an inflationary trade war, with tariffs so insane that even Canada's most famous right-wing politician, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, said they were like a family member stabbing you in the heart this week. Mexico's president sent Trump an open letter blasting the tariff threat, suggesting the U.S. would face punishing tariffs and retaliation, which is usually how this goes. And still, many Americans seem to be taking Trump neither seriously nor literally on this campaign promise. If you're one of them, you might want to take note of a Trump administration appointment today. Trump announced his choice to be the U.S. trade representative, a lawyer named Jamieson Greer. Now, Greer previously served as chief of staff to Trump's former U.S. trade representative, Robert Lighthizer. He's the architect of that tariffs they did the last time around on $370 billion worth of Chinese imports. Those tariffs, as we reported on the show, spurred a trade war, nearly broke the backs of American farmers who lost access to their top Asian market. Just like the Tories and Truss in London 2 years ago, Donald Trump has told us what he plans to do. And just like them, the critics have said, this looks like it's going to be devastating if you do it. And now I guess we just wait, right, to see if we're about to enter the finding out phase of the story.
Vice President Harris addressed her supporters directly last night as her campaign team had their first public discussion about where they might have fallen short in the 2024 race. Here was senior campaign advisor David Plouffe on the Pod Save America podcast.
I'm naive in this way. I just thought at the end of the day, particularly because Trump did not close well, I thought Kamala Harris closed well. Trump was reminding people some of the things they don't like about him, that might give us what we needed. But at the end of the day, I think the political atmosphere, the desire for change, all those fundamentals that you've spent a lot of time talking about really presented huge challenges for us. So, you know, we got there, but we didn't get the breaks we needed on Election Day.
Joining us now, the 19th editor-at-large, Aaron Haynes, and chief strategist for the Bush-Cheney 2004 presidential campaign, Matthew Dowd. Both Aaron and Matthew are MSNBC political contributors. Still with us is Mark Leibovich. All right, Aaron, I'm going to begin with you. What do you make of what David Plouffe told the Pod Save America guys?
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly a very interesting kind of post-mortem, right? I think that podcast was something like an hour and a half of them just kind of revisiting what happened. Look, I mean, I think I certainly wrote in my column for the 19th at one point that 107 days, I think that was the only way that we were going to get Vice President Kamala Harris as a candidate, but was 107 days enough for her to win over the American electorate? And I think the answer is no. And I mean, obviously the answer is no, but I think that's also kind of where that campaign team landed. But, you know, I think also, you know, reflecting on where we are as a democracy on the other side of this election is absolutely a useful exercise. But I think what's also useful is to remind ourselves of who we say we are as a country. And, you know, are we still a country that's committed to this idea of multicultural, multiracial, multi-gender democracy? And what does it mean if we aren't? Like, I was listening to this podcast and look, kind of reading some of the other kind of postmortem assessments of 2024 that kind of suggest this strategy going forward that abandons identity politics. And that was the thing that I found most interesting kind of from this conversation and others like it, because it's not as if Donald Trump's entire strategy was not based on identity politics, right, Katie? I mean, MAGA is an identity. It's one based on white grievance around issues from the economy to education to immigration. And so this was not really about Democrats or Kamala Harris losing. The other side simply had the better identity politics strategy. So I think on the other side of this, thinking about who the voters are as opposed to who either of these candidates are and who had the better campaign is the question that we need to be asking ourselves now.
One of the arguments is not totally that it's identity politics' fault, but it's that the Democrats focused on the wrong identities. Instead of focusing on the differences between people on their socioeconomic levels, they focused on people of different races, but ultimately all those people, or the majority of them, were college educated and they lived in cities. They were of a certain class and didn't go to the people of the other class, the lower socioeconomic class, who were struggling more. And that's what Donald Trump was able to do effectively, to peel off a number of those voters who had long seen black and brown and white voters, who had long seen the Democratic Party as their ancestral home.
Yeah, I mean, look, I certainly take that point, but also, kind of weaponizing immigration, especially kind of in the home stretch in a way that did appeal certainly to the white voters that he already had. But also, interestingly, to your point, that was a message that resonated with some black and brown voters, particularly black men, Latino men were open to his message on things like immigration. And that was also a message that was tied to the economy, which we know is the number one issue for all voters. And so, I think as we continue to kind of process how and why this happened, unpacking what the role of identity politics in all of this feels very important to do in this moment. And I think the other thing we have to acknowledge is the thing that we don't or can't or haven't yet figured out how to poll for, and that is what it will take for this country to elect a woman. I mean, like, specifically what it means for the American electorate to believe that a woman is the most qualified person to lead on issues, whether that's the economy or foreign policy. Whether we associate the qualities that we associate with the president with women, like strength or, authority or a commanding presence or trustworthiness. Like, for the second time in our history, Donald Trump, has beat the woman that was running against him. People saw him as the person that was the more, the candidate that they preferred. So there are complicated answers for how that happened. But what we should be asking ourselves why and what role gender, which was absolutely on display in this election, played in the outcome.
Yeah, I think you're right to ask that question and to see how much of a role it did play. I wonder, though, if this, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, Matthew, if this is more of a Democratic Party problem, the Democratic Party not necessarily having an identity in itself, or not being well enough defined for the public as a change vehicle.
I mean, here's how I look at this election. And I think oftentimes myths develop in the aftermath of an election that aren't based in data and aren't based in actually what happened in the course of this. I think we can't talk about this election. And I noticed on this podcast, which I listened to part of, that the elephant in the room or the donkey in the room that was never mentioned was Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden's job approval rating on election day was 40%. And the normal election outcome of somebody with a 40% approval rating for their vice president is to get 40 or 41% of the vote. The vice president got 48% of the vote in this election. And I think that reading this one election is somehow an examination of so many other things other than the most important factor on election day in every state and in every demographic group was Joe Biden's job approval rating. That's what drove the vote cast more than anything else in here. And I would remind all of us and your listeners and viewers, 2 years ago, the Democrats did exceedingly well in all these states, and they elected women across the board for governor, for Senate. not only in 2022, but in 2024 simultaneously, where the vice president was losing in this. And so I think overreading this in too many other avenues, take the Democrats, I think here's what's happening. Both the Democrats and the Republicans are misreading the results of the election. The Democrats are misreading it, thinking they have to somehow abandon all these things and sort of completely reformulate their party, when I believe that isn't true. They have to make adjustments. They have to make changes. They have to do certain things. But basically, they just won a series of elections in 2022. And the Republicans are misreading this election, thinking they won because of Donald Trump. They won in spite of Donald Trump this year. Donald Trump underperformed by 7 or 8 points in this election, in a normal election with a job approval like Joe Biden. And that's what I think we have to start with. And then we can talk about all the other stuff.
Mark, what do you think of that?
I think, I agree. I mean, first of all, a couple of bottom lines here. I mean, one, it was basically a 50-50 race. And, Hillary Clinton had a 50-50 race. She won the popular vote. I think a couple things. I think Kamala Harris was a good candidate. I don't think she was a great president. It was not a great candidate. And I think one of the reasons for this is because Joe Biden put her in a terrible position, and also because he himself is unpopular, and inflation and immigration and all the issues that sort of weighed him down. And I think the other part of this is Donald Trump. I kind of agree with Matthew in that, yes, he kind of underperformed to some degree given Biden's approval. But look, Trump is a turnout machine. I mean, he overperformed in 2016. He overperformed certainly his polls in 2020. And it seems like he overperformed his polls maybe a tiny bit in this case. And Republicans have proven time and time again, when Donald Trump is not on the ballot, they underperform seriously. So in a few years, it's likely that there will be a new Democratic candidate, perhaps not someone we're even talking about now in the way that Barack Obama was not someone anyone talked about in 2004, 2005 as a potential 2008 nominee. And Donald Trump will not be on the ballot. And Republicans are not going to have that turnout magic that he has, proven to be in ownership of for 3 straight elections, and that will be winding down, and we'll be in another chapter. So again, 50-50. I think that's going to be true going forward.
Democrats have 2 years to try to find that next generation and get them ready for the election cycle, which again just begins in 2 years' time.
The reality is, I have no cash. It's all tied up. So right now, if I wanted to call a taxi cab, I can't do it. I don't have a credit card. I don't have a checking account. I have no place I can go take cash out except a little bit that I saved, and it's getting down to almost nothing. I do not regret it for a minute. I regret the persecution that I've been put to.
And there you have it. The man once dubbed America's mayor, who led New York City in the aftermath of one of the worst terrorist attacks our country has ever seen, who became Donald Trump's personal lawyer after years of selling access to his 9/11 celebrity status, has now, according to him, been left impoverished. It is a clear case for all of those MAGA sycophants out there. This is what blind loyalty to Trump will get you. In the eternal words of Rick Wilson, everything Trump touches dies, including careers. As you may recall, Giuliani was ordered to pay nearly $150 million to 2 Georgia election workers, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, whom he defamed while challenging the 2020 election results in their state. Yesterday's court hearing was held because lawyers for Freeman and Moss have claimed Giuliani has failed to turn over his assets as required by the courts. Suffice it to say that it was not a good day for Rudy, who lashed out at the judge in court, something he should know better than to do as a former U.S. attorney. He also appeared with new counsel as his original lawyer requested to be removed weeks ago due to a, quote, difference of opinion with Giuliani. Nowhere to be seen was Donald Trump, who has barely lifted a finger to help the man he called a great guy and a wonderful lawyer. In fact, Giuliani still claims that Trump and the RNC owe him $2 million, which he could really use right now. But Giuliani has been left with is being disbarred in both Washington, D.C. and New York as a result of his efforts to push Trump's big lie. And he is expected back in court in both places, in D.C. next month. He could be found in contempt of court for continuing to falsely accuse the 2 poll workers of having committed election fraud. And in January, he will face a trial in New York City over whether he will have to turn over other assets, his Florida home and his collection of 4 World Series rings to Ms. Freeman and Ms. Moss. And yet, Rudy says he does not regret a thing, not even for a minute. Joining me now is Catherine Christian, former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst, and the Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation, and somebody who has had a long-time adversarial relationship with Rudy Giuliani. So I'm going to go to you first, Rev. Rudy Giuliani seems to have been brought low, and yet he has asked the court to push his trial back in January so that he can attend Donald Trump's inauguration. The judge said no. His social calendar has nothing to do with his court cases. But that's how pathetic it is. Donald Trump owes him money, hasn't paid him. He's been destroyed for his support for Donald Trump's big lie, stripped of his mansion, stripped of his ring collection, and yet he's still a sycophant to Donald Trump. Please explain what is going on with this rather pathetic man.
It is rather pathetic to see the situation. But when you look at it in the broader context, Rudy Giuliani, who had a hostile relationship with the black community when he was mayor, police killings would happen. He'd show no empathy, no balance at all in what was being appealed to by the black community. And then you see him now where 2 black women, Ms. Shea and Ms. Moss, has brought him to accountability. But the real underlying story is that Donald Trump, who he was loyal to, has shown no loyalty to him, no statements, no tweets, nothing saying anything that he would back him up, which means all of the people that are in Washington now that are doing dances trying to get the anointing and blessings of Donald Trump should look at Rudy Giuliani and know that you can end up just as abandoned as Rudy Giuliani. If he would do this to Giuliani, what would he do to all of those that went around this country selling a bill of goods that he will not deliver on for people, no matter who they are, whether they're white in Appalachia or black in West Atlanta? He is one that only knows one thing, what is beneficial for Rudy Giuliani. For Donald Trump. Rudy Giuliani is the case example of the loyalty of Donald Trump is not reciprocal.
Right. And I mean, Catherine, it really goes across the board. Donald Trump has now had Jack Smith has withdrawn the cases against him, both for stealing classified documents and for attempting a coup to overthrow the government. But everyone else involved in those cases is still being charged. He could still wipe away Walt Nauta and the other gentleman's charge in Miami for having tried to help him steal those documents. But let's just go to the co-defendants in Georgia. Donald Trump was charged with 18 other people, including the head of Blacks for Trump, Harrison Floyd. They're all still being charged. 4 of them, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Kenneth Chesborough, and Scott Hall, already took plea deals. And then when you go to the classified documents case, Carlos de Oliveira and Walt Nauta, both still charged with hiding classified documents, including our nuclear secrets in Donald Trump's house, some in the bathroom. They're still charged. So, that is the lesson, right? Everyone around Donald Trump faces accountability, goes to prison. All those January 6th defendants, he skates through and forgets about them.
And he can do something with the 2 defendants on the classified documents case because they're federal crimes. He could pardon them. But Georgia, he can't help them in any way because it's a state crime. Rudy Giuliani, this is a civil case. He's a bankrupt, now disbarred attorney. And that's his life now. And Donald Trump can't pardon him for his defamation verdict. So, yes, as the Reverend Al said, and both Reverend Al and I are native New Yorkers, so we're very familiar with Rudy Giuliani. He was the U.S. attorney of what is supposed to be the premier U.S. attorney's office in the country, and the mayor. And he's now, as I said, a disbarred, bankrupt person. And, he is going to trial on January 16th. And of course, Donald Trump is not going to be there. And so this is what happens to people, unfortunately, who are in the Trump world. And we see what's happened to Rudy Giuliani.
Since Donald Trump became president-elect, his litany of criminal cases has slowly disappeared. Sentencing in his hush money case in Manhattan, where a jury found him guilty of 34 felony counts, is now indefinitely postponed. The pending federal cases against Trump for his alleged mishandling of classified documents and attempts to overturn the 2020 election have now ended. Earlier this week, special counsel Jack Smith filed motions to drop all 44 federal criminal counts in those cases, citing the Justice Department's position that a sitting president cannot be charged. And now Trump's lawyer is demanding that New York Attorney General Letitia James drop her case against Trump, too. Attorney General James successfully prosecuted Trump for civil fraud. In February, a judge found him liable for manipulating his net worth to defraud banks and insurers. He now owes the state of New York more than $450 million in damages. That judgment is currently being appealed. But in a letter to Attorney General James, Trump's lawyer argues, quote, President Trump has called for our nation's partisan strife to end and for the contending factions to join forces for the greater good of the country. This call for unity extends to the legal onslaught against him and his family that permeated the most recent election cycle. Joining me now is Christy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor who served for over a decade in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Christy, good to see you. Thank you for being here for the good of the country. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's so absurd, right? I mean, the idea that, this whole letter, it's 4 pages and it's a history lesson. He's citing Abraham Lincoln and the Thanksgiving Proclamation and George Washington, all about this call for unity, when all Donald Trump is called for is a call for retribution against the people who investigated him, against the prosecutors who prosecuted his cases. He's called the Democrats the enemy from within. And then this very lawyer who drafted this letter is the one who got up before the Supreme Court and said Donald Trump has the power to order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political rivals. Like this is not about a call for unity. I mean, it is laughable. This is not a serious legal argument. Nothing in here is a serious legal argument. It's more political rhetoric that's really, as Judge Chutkan has said about Trump's lawyers, unbefitting of experienced defense counsel.
And yet it's coming on the heels of these other cases being dropped. So what makes this case different?
Well, one way in which this case is different is this is a civil fraud case. This is not a criminal case. And this is not a federal DOJ where they dismissed their cases or moved to dismiss their cases because there was DOJ policy to do that. Here you have a civil case where there is Supreme Court law that's very clear in Clinton v. Jones, and it was actually upheld even in this most recent immunity decision that says if you're talking about unofficial acts that happened before the president was the president, there is no immunity for that. And you actually can still bring those claims while a president is a sitting president. Like that case can go on. But Clinton v. Jones doesn't show up at all in this letter. It's 4 pages. He cites a lot of case law. None of it relates to the fact that this is a civil case and it is different from the others.
So what do you think James does?
I think she laughs. She gets a good laugh this Thanksgiving Eve. I mean, maybe she responds to it, but it's clearly hey, this is nonsense. We're not dropping anything. And by the way, he's asking for the entire case to be dismissed. So Donald Trump was one defendant in this case, but this was a case against other family members. Mm-hmm. This was a case against Trump's businesses, right? Like this was not just against Donald Trump. So the idea that that Tish James should just drop the entire case against everybody is, just, again, laughable.
So this request for dismissal, it was sent by John Sauer, who, as you know, is Trump's pick for Solicitor General. Just how unusual is that?
I mean, but this is why it's also, the letter is a love letter to Donald Trump. He talks about the fact that, he's the most successful developer in all of New York City. This is a historic election victory. I mean, all the kind of flattery that's in here that's why he was picked. I mean, this is what Trump does. It's kind of not just the law, but all of his picks. You have to be kissing the ring. You have to be somebody who flatters him. And that's how you get into his orbit. And he really sees, I think, the Department of Justice and the Solicitor General and all of these legal positions really is people who are going to be his lawyers, focus on his interests, not the interests of the public, but his own. And that is very, very dangerous and something we've never seen before.
Well, perhaps at that point, he has said he's willing to take this case all the way up to the Supreme Court. What happens then?
I mean, again, I think the Supreme Court precedent here is pretty clear, at least with respect to this case. But, with the Supreme Court, who knows? I mean, I think we all also thought that there wouldn't be complete, immunity for criminal prosecution for official acts. And, that was a very surprising decision. So I think you can never really count out the Supreme Court to do something that hasn't been done before.
Christy Greenberg, what a treat to have you with us in studio. Thank you so much for being with us.
Actually, after Trump said he'd enact these new tariffs on Canada and Mexico, the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, floated the possibility of these retaliatory tariffs. Is there any concern, you think, within Trump world about this?
Well, in one way, Trump views, on the one hand, as Kelly said, he views tariffs as a very beautiful word, but he also views it as a point of leverage and negotiation. And I think back to something Jared Kushner actually once told me when, in 2016, when Trump did something that seemed on its surface crazy. And they said, look, we believe that even though this was maybe the wrong decision, that it has a benefit for him because it keeps people on their toes and they don't know if he's actually going to do the thing or not. If he's actually going to, he said he's going to levy these tariffs. Maybe he's using it for leverage. Maybe he's using it for negotiation. Maybe he backs down when Mexico comes in threatening their own tariffs. But they believe, as it has with NATO and in other areas, the fact that Trump very well might do the thing he's saying and the fact that he very well might not gives them leverage because he behaves as such an unpredictable negotiator.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley, and it's probably, there must be some to the fact that Trump, during his first administration, threatened Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the president of Mexico at the time, with tariffs if he didn't do something to what Mexico ended up doing was putting up to 20,000 troops in the southern border with Guatemala and Chiapas, but also towards the north as well. So he may be thinking that, well, with Mexico, President Sheinbaum, who is a protege of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, just the threat of it worked the first time. Maybe it's going to work this time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A tariff has real impact, but so does the threat of a tariff. And one downside of tariffs for the American consumer is that oftentimes the cost is not borne by those other countries, but it's borne in the prices that Americans will end up paying. And that's something that Americans have been very clear is unacceptable to them. It's one of the reasons, frankly, Trump won, because inflation and prices had gone up under the Biden administration. And so there is a world where if he carries through on this threat, and that's not even a guarantee that he will carry through, but that oftentimes he does something, then there is an outcry from his base, and that forces him to readjust yet again. So that's also another way this could potentially end.
Chuck, how do you see this? Because, again, Trump and, Ashley was talking about unpredictability is something that maybe foreign leaders can expect to be predictable.
Well, look, what the tariff regime allows him to do is it makes him the central force and the central negotiating person on pretty much everything. I mean, not to go all George Will on you, but, this has been a century-long effort by Congress to essentially hand power over to the executive branch. This is one of the many powers that that Congress has handed to the presidency on these tariff regimes. And so it is to sort of follow up on what Ashley was saying, the feature is forcing a negotiation. The feature isn't the tariff itself, right? That's what Trump loves so much about this, is that it brings people to the table. In many ways, it brings people asking for favors for him. He slaps a tariff on, and an importer might say, hey, well, not on these goods. What can I do for you, Mr. President, that would take this off the tariff list? And you can see suddenly it's a favor here and a favor there. This is why it's potentially a very corruptible part of government if we're not careful here and if it's not abused. And I think that is certainly a concern when you talk to the more libertarian-minded economics folks, including the folks at the Cato Institute, this is another reason why tariffs potentially are so damaging to the country, because it's so easily corruptible. It becomes part of this back and forth deal making. And by the way, just to simplify this, we're talking about tariffs, but let me make this pretty simple. If this slaps on, it's a guacamole tax. We get most avocados in this country come from Mexico. If you enjoy guacamole, be prepared to pay a higher tax for it if these tariffs go through.
No, I mean, guacamole is one thing, and you're absolutely right. I mean, not only most of the avocados come from Mexico, but the best ones do come from Mexico. And so, but it's also, you know, automobiles that we buy in our country by American companies many times are made in and assembled in Mexico. You know, washing machines, dryers, water heaters. I mean, the list is endless. And I'm curious, Chuck, and I'm just kind of off course a little bit of our conversation, but you're talking about the corruption of government. In your latest piece, you describe Trump's transition as the destructive politics of, quote, whatever it takes. What do you mean by that? And I'm so fascinated by your analysis of this, because there is and has been a corruption element to government in our nation for the longest time.
Look, it is, you know, you can't sit here and say there's never been corruption in government. It's almost as old as the Republic itself, you know. But as a friend of mine said, there was a time when the corruption at least benefited constituents, right? The congressman may take a kickback from a company, but it was a kickback that got them a permit or got them a regulation that allowed them to build in that district, right? And now the corruption is a whole new level. Now people go into Congress simply to get an account on Cameo or something like that. And what I'm saying is that it's when we no longer allow character or moral failings to be disqualifying. And when you start to chip away at that and chip away at that and chip away at that, and you start to believe that politics is so rough and tumble that it is only for the amoral, or it's only for those that have the stomach for it. And a lot of times it's people that have different moral compass than other parts of the electorate. And it's that chip away. And if you get people who are willing to essentially not follow a moral compass, say in their personal life, and you put them in charge of a massive government agency, the possibility of corruptibility only increases. And we know this. We know character is king when it comes to these things. And I just think, take, a couple of the nominees. No one says that the president shouldn't have somebody who he wants to see reform the Pentagon. Can't you find somebody who didn't have the police called after they had intimate relations with somebody? And that's sort of the point I'm going here. Why is it that it's so important to, quote unquote, own the libs, that if you agitate the quote unquote other side or make people uncomfortable with your picks on a character basis, you're winning. And I don't know what you're winning, but I know the country's not winning.
One of the favorite quotes of mine by Maimonides, which I often refer to, he said, "In the world there are no perfect men or women. All humans are composed of merits and sins. And likewise, there can be no perfect or infallible states or governments. If the conduct of its members merits exceeds sins, then justice reigns in that state or government. And if sins exceed merits, there reigns corruption." We can always learn from the past, and Rabbi Maimonides is one that I absolutely refer to all the time. Chuck Todd and Ashley Parker, my friends, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
President-elect Trump's incoming border czar Tom Homan visited the southern border along with Republican Governor Greg Abbott of Texas yesterday. Homan and Abbott spoke to National Guard members and state troopers before serving Thanksgiving meals to service members. Homan also issued a warning to governors and mayors who say they're planning to resist the incoming administration's plans to deport people here illegally.
It's a shame we have other governors and other mayors who are right out of the gate. I said they're going to push back on President Trump and what we're trying to do, especially for interior enforcement. Let me be clear. There is going to be a mass deportation because we just finished a mass illegal immigration crisis on the border, where anybody can look at 9 out of 10 people claim asylum at the border will end up with an order removal. The men and women of ICE, they're going to have a tough job ahead of them. And I'm sending a message for the people that say they're going to get in our way. They're going to stop us from doing what we're doing on interior enforcement operation. I've said 100 times in the last week, don't cross that line. It is a felony to knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien from immigration authorities. Don't test us. The nation wants a safe country. We've had enough crime in this country, illegal alien crime. It's time to end it and stop it. President Trump's committed to it.
That's Tom Homan, John Lemire, who's the border czar, that sort of nebulous position, but he has a clear mandate from Donald Trump to go in, remove illegal people here illegally, and he says he's going after the criminals first. I think most people in most communities would agree that that's a good idea, but the way he's talking about it, saying don't cross us, don't test us, this is happening whether you like it or not.
Yeah, a lot of bellicose rhetoric there, and there are two threats that he is saying they're going to put forth on states and cities that might not cooperate. Already he has said, we will withhold federal funding from states and cities that don't go along with these deportation maneuvers. And secondly, some of his Trump allies have suggested that if you were a mayor, say, who resists it, you yourself could be subject to arrest if you don't fully cooperate. So at least I think this is setting up to be maybe one of the big public showdowns of the early Trump administration, and one the Democrats feel like might trigger the protest movement that we saw after Trump's first term, but so far has been quiet this time around.
The protest movement is just going to depend on the area. I remember this summer when I did a focus group of African-American voters in Michigan and heard their anger about the way that the local homeless population had been treated and kicked out of shelters to make room for migrants. And there's so much anger all around the country in these different cities that I don't know that protesters are factoring that in, because Trump, we saw how the election went. This is something that the American public is really concerned about.
I'm keeping a close eye on this as this develops, but you heard the promise there from the border czar that they will not tolerate any opposition to this program.